The second wave of the Spanish flu had reached its cruelest peak. Inside a crumbling brick hospital on the edge of town, the air burned with bleach and sickness. Every bed was filled. Cots lined the hallways. Sheets were reused before they were dry. Nurses moved like ghosts behind gauze masks, their eyes red from exhaustion. They called it the fever ward. At first, the strange reports came from Nurse Margaret Halley. Steady-handed, practical, not prone to superstition. She said the patients were sitting up at night. Not all of them, just a few. Men and women who hours earlier had been too weak to lift their heads would suddenly rise in their beds at exactly 2:17 a.m. Their eyes remained closed. Their bodies trembled with fever. And in voices that did not quite sound like their own, they would whisper names. By morning, the named patients would be dead. At first, the nurses blamed coincidence. The flu was merciless. Perfectly healthy young people were turning blue and drowning in their own lungs within hours. Death was constant. Predicting it wasn't difficult. But then came the night Nurse Halley heard her own name. She was making rounds when 3 patients sat upright at once. Their movements were stiff, unnatural, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. Their mouths opened in perfect unison. Margaret Halley. The lights flickered. She froze. The ward returned to silence. The patients slowly lowered themselves back onto their pillows, breathing raggedly as if nothing had happened. Margaret did not sleep the rest of the night. By morning, she was still alive. Relief spread through the staff until orderly Thomas Avery collapsed at noon. He had been named 2 nights before. He died before sunset. The whispers were not predicting the same night's deaths. They were announcing who was next. Panic quietly infected the staff more quickly than the virus itself. Nurses began keeping lists, comparing names, marking times. Every whisper came at 2:17 a.m. Every name matched a death within 48 hours. Doctors tried sedation, restraints, isolation. Nothing stopped the nightly rising. Then came the night the entire ward sat up. Margaret stood in the center of the room, unable to move. The whisper began softly, then layered upon itself until it became a single terrible chorus. They were naming everyone: nurses, doctors, orderlies. The patients fell back onto their pillows. The gas lights went out. In the darkness, Margaret heard breathing, but it wasn't the ragged breathing of the sick. It was slow. Morning came. Every single patient in the ward was dead. Not one nurse had fallen ill overnight. But within 2 days, the priest died. Then the mayor. Then Margaret's brother. Within a week, half the hospital staff were buried on the hill behind the building. The fever ward was closed by month's end. Official reports blamed influenza complications and exhaustion. Margaret Halley survived. She left nursing, moved west, never spoke of that October again. But for the rest of her life, she woke at exactly 2:17 a.m. And sometimes, just sometimes, she swore she could hear it. Her name, whispered back to her from somewhere in the dark.